Derek, you're my brother-in-law, an army major, 12 years in, 3 deployments you've never stopped talking about. And I need you to know that everything that happened at that dinner table had been building for 6 years before you ever opened your mouth. You said it so casually, so certain no one would push back. You call yourself military? I bet you've never seen real combat. You said it with a smile, the kind you save for family gatherings, the kind that means you've already decided who's beneath you. I didn't respond. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that silence wasn't me having nothing to say. That silence was 6 years of restraint finally being spent on the wrong moment to break it. You never knew what that silence cost me. You never asked. Not once. In 6 years of holiday dinners and backyard barbecues and the birth of your second kid, did you ask what I actually did before I met your sister-in-law? You assumed. You looked at a quiet man who didn't wear his service like a uniform at the dinner table, who didn't correct you when you talked about real soldiers like it was a category you belonged to and I didn't, and you filled in the blanks with whatever made you comfortable. You called it, more than once, to other people, when you thought I couldn't hear, some desk job thing. You told your own mother I probably did logistics. You said it like logistics was a punchline. I let you. I need to introduce the rest of this properly, the way I've learned to introduce everything now. Carefully, with the parts that matter first. Rachel is my wife, your wife's younger sister, the reason I sit at that table at all. She's known the whole truth since our second date, when I told her more in one conversation than I'd told my own parents in a decade, because something about the way she listened made it feel safe to say. She's kept that truth exactly where I asked her to keep it, quiet, folded away, not a thing to be produced at family dinners for anyone's benefit, including mine. That's not shame, Derek. That's just how some of us carry it. You never understood the difference between a man who doesn't talk about something and a man who doesn't have anything to talk about. You never saw the two worlds I moved between. In one, I was your sister-in-law's husband, the guy who fixed the fence, who showed up early to help set up chairs, who laughed at your stories about basic training like they were the most interesting thing anyone at that table had ever heard. In the other, the one I never brought home, I was someone with a name that didn't get written down in after-action reports, attached to units whose names weren't said out loud, even inside the buildings where the work got planned. I'm not going to describe that world to you now, not because I'm protecting some secret for your benefit, but because it was never yours to know. That's the part you never understood about people like me. The quiet isn't a wound you get to press on. It's a door I chose not to open, and every time you smirked at me across a table, you were mistaking a closed door for an empty room. You assumed a closed door was an empty room for 6 years, Derek, and you built a whole identity for yourself on the assumption. You wore your rank the way some men wear a watch they want people to notice. You talk about your training exercises like campaign stories, about the obstacle course times, about the one deployment where you ran convoy logistics through a relatively quiet sector, and you'd watch the table for the reaction you wanted. And you got it, every time. Because your in-laws love you, and because nobody at that table had any reason to measure your story against anything harder. Nobody except me. And I never said a word, because I wasn't there to win a comparison you didn't know we were having. That's the part you never saw, that there was never a competition from my side. You built one anyway. You needed a version of the family where the veteran with the visible medals and the confident stories was the real soldier, and the quiet brother-in-law who changed the subject was somehow less than that. I let you have that version, Derek, for years, because it cost me nothing and it seemed to matter to you a great deal. I didn't know yet that letting you have it would eventually curdle into something you'd say out loud, in front of your own children, in front of my wife, in front of her parents who'd known me for a decade and never once heard me correct you. While you were building that story about yourself, I was quietly doing something you never noticed. I was staying exactly who I already was. That sounds like nothing, I know. It wasn't nothing. Every dinner where you took the floor with another story, I was making a choice not to take it from you. Every time your father-in-law turned to me and asked, almost as an afterthought, "And you? Did you serve too?" I gave him 3 words and changed the subject, and I watched you relax every single time, because my 3 words never threatened your narrative. You never noticed that I was managing you. You never noticed that the silence you mistook for nothing was actually a decision, made fresh every single time, to let the room stay comfortable for people I loved. There's a ledger, Derek. I want you to know that now, because you never knew it existed while it was being kept. It isn't bitter. I want to be precise about that. Because this isn't a story about resentment. It's a story about arithmetic you didn't know was running. Every comment you made about real soldiers, every joke about desk jobs, every time you told your kids that their uncle by marriage probably did paperwork, went somewhere. Not into anger. Into an account I wasn't planning to collect on. I never went looking for the moment that would balance it. I genuinely believed, right up until that dinner, that the account would just sit there forever, uncollected, because collecting it had never been the point. What you also never saw was who else was watching, quietly, the same way I was. Rachel's father has an old friend, retired now, been to maybe 4 of these family dinners over the years, always polite, always a little formal, the kind of presence that makes a room straighten its posture without trying to. You knew him as the general, a family friend from her father's old business dealings, someone who showed up at the big holidays and shook everyone's hand, and asked good questions, and left early. You never thought to wonder how a retired general ends up as a standing invite to a family that isn't military. You never wondered because wondering wasn't something you did about anyone at that table except me, and only ever in the direction that made you look bigger. I'm going to tell you about the dinner now, the one from your thumbnail, the one you've probably already told 3 other people about in a version where you come out ahead. It was Rachel's parents' anniversary dinner. 20 tables worth of leaves in that dining room, every extended branch of the family folded into one room, and you were in rare form. You'd had a good year, a promotion, a new assignment you were proud of, and you were telling it well, the way you always do, working the table like it was a room full of people who needed convincing. I was at the far end, next to Rachel, doing what I always did, which was mostly listening and occasionally passing the bread. You got to me the way you always eventually did. You turned, mid-story, and you said it, the line from the thumbnail, word for word, like you'd been saving it. You call yourself military? I bet you've never seen real combat. You said it with the smile. You said it loud enough that the table quieted, because everyone could hear the shape of what you were doing even if they couldn't name it. You were drawing a line in front of everyone, and putting yourself on the side of it that mattered. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have an answer. Because I've spent years deciding that answer wasn't yours to receive at a dinner table, in front of children, over dessert. That's when the general set down his fork. I want you to sit with how quiet that moment was, Derek, because you've probably remembered it as dramatic and it wasn't. It was small, and that's exactly what made it land the way it did. He didn't raise his voice. He looked down the table at me, past you, like you were a doorway he was seeing through rather than a person he was addressing, and he asked one question. What was your call sign? You stopped smiling. I watched it happen in real time. The exact moment the shape of the room changed for you. A man you'd filed away as a polite old family friend had just asked a question that only makes sense if he already suspected the answer mattered. Nobody at that table knew why a retired general would ask a mostly silent brother-in-law for a call sign unless there was something underneath the silence worth asking about. You'd built 6 years of your identity on the assumption that there wasn't. In 4 words, he unbuilt it. I answered him. I'm not going to write the word here for you, Derek, the same way I never said it at that table for anyone else. Some things stay exactly where they've always lived, and that dinner wasn't the place I decided to change that. It was simply the place where someone else already knew. What mattered wasn't the word itself. What mattered was the general's face when I said it. Recognition, not surprise, like a man confirming something he'd carried quietly for years without ever mentioning it at a family dinner, because it had never been his to bring up either. Then he said, to the whole table, not unkindly, that he'd worked adjacent to men who used that call sign once, a long time ago, in places that don't get written up in the stories people tell at anniversary dinners. You should have listened before you decided who I was. I'm not going to pretend the table erupted, Derek, because it didn't. That's not what these moments actually look like. What happened was smaller and worse for you. The conversation didn't get louder. It got careful. Rachel's mother reached over and refilled my water without saying anything. The kind of small gesture that means more than a toast would have. Your own wife wouldn't meet your eyes for the rest of the night. And you did the thing men like you do when the story stops being about admiration and starts being about something you can't perform your way out of. You got quiet. You found something urgent to say to your kids. You didn't apologize that night, and I didn't expect you to, because men who need 6 years to build a story rarely have anything ready for the moment it collapses. I want to be honest about what I felt, because this isn't a revenge story and I won't pretend it is. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt, more than anything, a strange kind of tiredness. The tiredness of a ledger finally being read out loud after years of choosing not to open it myself. I'd never wanted that moment. I'd have been fine, genuinely fine, letting you keep your version of me forever if you'd simply left it at assumption instead of turning it into something you said out loud, smiling, in front of children who now had to unlearn what you just taught them about who deserves respect at that table. In the weeks after, you tried a few things. You try to joke about it first. Guess we've got a real dark horse in the family. Testing whether the room would let you fold it back into your old narrative as a fun twist rather than a correction. Nobody laughed the way you wanted. Then you tried avoidance, which suited you better. 6 months of finding reasons to talk to anyone else at family gatherings, which I let you have. The same way I'd let you have the story for 6 years before. I never brought it up again. I never needed to. The general never brought it up again either. He'd said exactly as much as the moment required and not one word more, and I've come to understand that's a kind of discipline you're still working toward. The real consequence, if you're waiting for me to describe one, was smaller and more lasting than anything I could have engineered. Your father-in-law started asking me the occasional real question, the kind with actual curiosity behind it, and I started answering a few of them, carefully, the way I choose what stays private and what doesn't. Rachel told me later that her mother had quietly stopped inviting you to give the anniversary toast the following year, gave it to her own father instead, and nobody explained why, and nobody needed to. You didn't lose your family, Derek. You lost the specific privilege of narrating it. I don't need an apology from you, and I'm not going to pretend I'm owed one in some grand sense, because that was never what any of this was about. What I need you to understand, the last thing I'll say to you directly, is that you spent 6 years measuring my worth against a story I never told you, and the moment someone else supplied one true sentence, your whole framework came down without me lifting a finger. That should tell you something about how it was built. I hope, for your sake and for your kids, that the next time you're tempted to decide who's real and who isn't across a dinner table, you remember what it felt like the one time you were wrong out loud. If this one hit close to home, if you've ever had someone underestimate exactly what you carried, or you've sat quiet at a table while someone else got to decide who you were, tell me your story in the comments. I read every one of them, and some of the best story times on this channel started right there.